leaving. That's the message from demonstrators at UCLA's campus early this morning after police entered a pro-Palestinian encampment and chaos ensued. Good morning. You're watching Morning Rush. I'm Jay Strubberg.
I'm Alex Livingston.
And I'm Carolyn Bruck, in for Rob Nelson.
We are monitoring the protests that continue to unfold at college campuses across the country this morning.
Yeah, here's a live look at UCLA's campus right now, where students, faculty, and community members have demanded that the school divest from its ties with Israel. Police conducted a pre-dawn raid on the pro-Palestinian encampment early this morning, barely 24 hours after counter-demonstrators attacked that same encampment. Police initially appeared to back off from a confrontation with protesters, but came back in force to begin removing the barricades fortifying the encampment.
A short time later, officers in riot gear deployed tear gas and detonated flashbang devices. You're seeing the aftermath here. Dozens of people taken into custody, and as the sun rose over UCLA, the encampment was mostly cleared of demonstrators, but some protesters stood nearby chanting, "We will rebound." Now, around 6 a.m. Eastern time, the university issued a safety alert declaring the encampments unlawful and ordering everyone to leave or face consequences.
We'll have a live report from LA in just a minute. We also have team coverage this morning with White House Correspondent Serena Marshall in Washington with the political reaction to the escalating protests that we've seen nationwide. But let's start with national correspondent Thomas Hoppough, who is in New York on Columbia University campus this morning. Good morning, Thomas.
Good morning. We're here just outside of Columbia University, where over 2 weeks of protests have erupted, which has spread and sparked across the country to dozens of campuses. Right now, everything is still secured with police behind me, not allowing access to many people, media included, and even some students. But overnight, there were more arrests made at New York schools. Police arrested more than a dozen protesters at Fordham. You can see the indoor encampment set up there. University leaders there requested help from the NYPD yesterday, like we saw from Columbia and City College of New York earlier this week. The school wrote to the NYPD saying, in an effort to ensure that further escalation does not occur, I've determined that the encampment and related disruptions pose a clear and present danger to persons, property, and the substantial functioning of the university, require the use of emergency authority to protect persons and property. Now, we have confirmed police also arrested people at Stony Brook University early this morning. According to the university, 29 people were arrested, including faculty members and others not affiliated with the school. They say the arrests were for violating various legal statutes and university policies. Now, right now, the initial epicenter of this protest is calm, but in less than 2 weeks, students are set to graduate, and one student told us he's worried that celebrations will look different.
I've been asking my family that was planning to come originally, are you still planning on coming? And I think there's a lot of uncertainty, right? But even if they hold a graduation here with so many kind of cops present, it's not going to feel like the moment of celebration that I think me and my family would really want it to be.
So there's a lot of questions about what these protests are going to look like now in the coming days. Yesterday afternoon, because people were not allowed on campus, protesters particularly aren't allowed on campus, they started protesting right outside the gates right behind me, and they also started protesting last night outside as well. But again, the university has asked for police to remain here until May 17th. Their commencement is on May 15th. So we know that the NYPD is speaking with the university about what resources they need in order to stay here and keep a calm presence like it is now. Guys.
National Correspondent Thomas Hoppough, thank you. White House Correspondent Serena Marshall is standing by with the political reaction to all of this. Good morning, Serena.
Yeah, good morning. And the White House here has been noticeably silent on this issue, but over on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue on Capitol Hill, they did pass a bill that would help expand the definition of what is anti-Semitism. That bill passing with broad bipartisan support, 320 to 91, with Republicans and Democrats on both sides of that bill passage, that would broaden the definition to enforce to what is used by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition. Now, that states anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. And it goes on to provide some examples, saying that includes targeting of the state of Israel conceived as a Jewish collectively, but also saying criticism of Israel similar to that levied against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. Now, it's important to note that the term and definition instituted by Congress for what is anti-Semitic is used by things like the Department of Education when determining anti-discrimination laws at the federal level. And critics have argued, though, that this definition, this bill, wasn't even needed because already there was a definition for anti-Semitism that had been used in the past. Now, the ACLU asked lawmakers to not pass this bill, saying in a statement that it would also likely chill free speech of students on college campuses by incorrectly equating criticism of the Israeli government with anti-Semitism. Now, the bill's future in the Senate is unclear, and it's unclear here at the White House. We have asked them whether the president would support this legislation, have yet to hear back, but the president has been noticeably silent. He did speak out about these protests when they really were first getting underway more than a week ago. At the time, he condemned both anti-Semitism and those who, quote, don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was peppered with questions, more than half a dozen during yesterday's press briefing. Here's what she had to say.
The president is being kept regularly updated on what's happening, as you just stated, across the country. He is monitoring the situation closely, so is his team. And I would just add that no president has spoken more forcefully about combating anti-Semitism than this president.
The president, though, is in a bit of a tough spot on this situation. Republicans are blaming the president for not being in control, for the disorder, but it does come as the White House's not heeded demands by these students. They continue to support Israel's right to defense while also calling on more humanitarian aid to get into Gaza, also trying to push forward that hostage deal, that pause in the fighting. But the president won't be able to distance himself from the situation forever. He is scheduled to give a commencement address in Atlanta at Morehouse University in just over 2 weeks, May 19th. And while Morehouse hasn't seen many of these protests, just up the road at the University of Georgia and Emory, there have been those pro-Palestinian protesters in participation, and you can expect the president's commencement address, there will be demonstrators out in force. You guys.
And Serena, this war in Gaza, I mean, this has been a major point of contention for the president, kind of walking that fine line of supporting Israel, as you mentioned, but also saying there needs to be more humanitarian aid for Gazans. We're just, 5-6 months away from Election Day. Have you heard anything or just how the Biden administration plans to garner support from voters when it comes to this topic in particular?
Well, when you ask the White House or even the campaign more acutely about this question of voters and what's going on, they push back on it. They say this isn't a question about getting votes or not. It's about the situation on the ground, ensuring that Israel won't face another October 7th, while also ensuring that the humanitarian aid that's badly needed, their term, gets into Gaza. That they want to see those ports built. They did those airdrops of food aid. They want more than anything that pause in the fighting. We had Secretary Blinken back in the region this week trying to push that pause forward, trying to get Hamas to the table. They say that they've been balking at these discussions, that they won't settle for anything less than a full withdrawal, which Israel said won't happen, given Hamas has said they want to see Israel off of the map. And so that is where things really stand. And the White House's position is give Israel the right, give them the weapons to defend themselves, but ensure that aid gets in. There still is that discord, too, when it comes to the Rafah crossing there.
All right, White House Correspondent Serena Marshall, thank you. All right, here is a live look from the campus of UCLA where some protesters you can see are still standing there and chanting. We can't quite hear exactly what they're saying right now, but this comes after police raided encampments there on the property, on the premises there early this morning, and there were some arrests. Maybe we had live video in the last hour of arrests being made. From what we could see, things remained peaceful at that point. There were zip ties involved. We do see a crowd there still behind the barricade. I believe that is near Royce Hall. That's where one of our live shots were earlier, and this is video from earlier this morning. You see those zip ties there, arrests being made. On other campuses, some of the charges that students have faced were trespassing, so we're not quite sure exactly how many in this situation or what they will be charged with, but we do have our correspondent Dan Grossman there, who has been there all morning, so let's check in with him. Dan, what are you seeing?
Hey guys, similar to what we said last time, before I'm going to step out of the way so you can see, these are the remaining students that I had mentioned earlier, and these are the riot police that have gradually made their way through this encampment all morning. Now, when I made my way, I was on the other side of where these students are currently chanting. When I made my way around, a lot of the students that had been in this encampment were gathered outside of the buses where those dozens of students that were zip-tied were being taken, and they were trying to form what looked like some degree of a human shield to stop those buses. Now, I'm going to ask Lewis, our photojournalist here, to turn around so you can actually see the encampment that was raided earlier today, just about 2 hours ago. All of these tents were up and students were here congregating in what was a relatively calm scene, but then those flashbangs started to go off and it gradually pushed those students back. They quickly moved back and started to use extra barricades that were against the wall, which is where they currently are, to try to resist the coming police officers in their riot gear. We did not see any confrontation between police and students. They did not put up much of a resistance outside of their continued chants. So what you mentioned before about the number of people who had been detained, I can tell you that there have been at least 30 from what I've seen. There were dozens on the buses already, and then there was a steady line of them who had been zip-tied, being led out by individual officers to that intake area. We have still yet to hear from the chancellor, but what I can tell you is we have not seen any direct confrontations, physical altercations between the remaining students here or throughout the morning and the riot police that are here as well.
It really is remarkable, the scenes that we're seeing playing out on campuses. It's probably the largest scale demonstrations since maybe the racial justice protests after George Floyd's death. These protesters clearly want to make their voices heard about the war in Gaza. Talk a little bit about what the protesters behind you want. We hear a lot of divest from Israel. What does that even mean? We hear free Palestine. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so similar to what Columbia's demands were, they want their university to divest their interests in companies that back Israeli companies, and from the students that we have spoken with, they said they want that here at UCLA as well as the entire University of California system. So they said they would not leave until those demands are met. Again, we heard from the chancellor yesterday, and they used the word abhorrent when they mentioned the violence that had taken place, but they have not at all given any sort of response to the demands that these students have made. You can see these lively students who are yelling at these cops. It is a mix of individual attacks against these law enforcement officials that stand before them, and then other chants talking about that divestment. So it's clear that they want their university that they go to stop supporting companies that do business with Israel. But that's so far what we've heard from the students who have been inside the encampment.
Dan, have you been able to talk to any Jewish students on campus there? I was at Emory University where protests were happening, certainly not to the scale that you're seeing where you are, but I spoke to Jewish students who said they feel uncomfortable. Have you been able to get any sense for how the Jewish students on campus there feel?
Yeah, and that's not just here at UCLA. This is something that has been nationwide. I'd spoken to students who go to school at Penn, at Yale, at Columbia, and all of them had mentioned that seeing these protests en masse, that they have been targeted with direct violence as well as harassment. We also spoke to a gentleman who lives here in Beverly Hills, and he said even he yesterday had been the target of verbal harassment as well. We did not hear that ourselves personally, but this is what we have heard from multiple students around the country. And as you can imagine, being a minority group on campus, seeing a lot of these students who seem to have a lot of anger about this situation. They claim that they have been the targets of both physical and verbal assaults.
And Dan, 2 nights ago, I believe it was, is when we saw just that outburst of violence between the pro-Palestinian protesters that you're talking about and then counter-protesters and the clashes and the violence and the physical aspect of that. What has the escalation been, you know, just overnight, whether it's from counter-protesters or police involvement or presence there? What does that look like in the early morning hours?
For the most part, I would say it remained calm. There were flashbangs, there was yelling, there was a degree of commotion, but we did not see any physical altercations. Obviously, these police in riot gear have batons, they have shields, they have weapons. I say weapons, but they have things that are used as intimidation factors. I mentioned a little bit earlier that medics that tend to these students, they claim that 5 had been hit in the head with rubber bullets. Those are just from the medics that have tended to these students. We ourselves have not witnessed any direct confrontation. As soon as these riot officers have made their advances, these students have very quickly moved back, and the closest amount of space between any of them, I would say, was probably 10 yards or so. So we have not seen any use of force outside of deterrent tactics. The flashbangs worked effectively, and apparently so did the rubber bullets that we have seen so far this morning, but no direct physical contact between police or these protesters or any counter-protesters who have been here as well.
And Dan, real quick before I have to let you go, police expected to be there for the foreseeable future. What does campus life look like?
The campus has been shut down. Yesterday, there were no classes. We didn't hear personally, but I was speaking with students who get text message alerts, and they said that today's classes would resume, but online only around 3 a.m. when really the kind of heat of the moment was occurring with those flashbangs and this police raid. They told students over this text message service to avoid going out on campus. However, we do know that classes will resume today, at least in an online fashion.
All right, national correspondent Dan Grossman live in Los Angeles for us at UCLA. Thank you so much. We'll be back after this.